Jillian to constantly be funny.
It's basically on pressure
like,
on
we're
you.
you!
I always come up with
I always come up with the funny thing.
Last week.
No,
Me.
I'm actually so upset.
No.
I actually am always the one that comes up
like
with
half
things.
the time.
Dude,
you do not always. Last week, me.
No.
Yes,
no.
yes,
What happens is I'm making jokes before we hit record, and then Mommy goes,
I'm making jokes.
And then Mommy's like, oh my goodness, no, I make the joke.
No.
You build.
Exactly,
You build.
building makes it better. You just say, like, you're ugly, and then I make it better.
I never say that.
You say things like that, and then I make it a funny joke.
I'm
like,
done
it wouldn't
with
be funny if it was just you. It's a tag team, Kaylee. We're better together.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
We got it.
Welcome to Wait What?
Wait, what?
I'm Rochelle.
I'm Kaylee.
I'm Erica. I'm Jillian.
And this is our podcast. Wait, what?
This is where we take common beliefs, sayings, or actions, deconstruct them, and have conversations sharing our opinions and experiences about how they have affected us. Our goal is to start and extend conversations.
Thank you.
So today, this whole month, the month of April, is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And we had started out a while ago talking about we've done some episodes on women and just some things about that and how just beliefs and stuff surrounding that and what we deal with and everything. And last week we did What About Difficult Women, and how there's a kind of a lose-lose game, a zero-sum game, if you say it that way, that for women. And so if you missed it and you want to go back and listen. But today our topic is, what about
Consent.
Yes, consent.
I didn't know we were saying it at the same time.
And this really is such a huge topic, and one that we've definitely had a lot of conversations surrounding. One of the things, though, is that we really believe that there needs to be a lot more conversations about consent. What it is, why it's needed, why it's so important, what, where it's lacking, all of those things. And we also want to be clear that, like, these conversations about consent are not for survivors of sexual assault. They're not for those people. Like, it is for hopefully people that can learn what consent actually is, and that we can change things. We can change the stories, change the talk, change the communication surrounding it, so that we can better understand it, so that hopefully we can have less assaults, less victims, less, and that.
We wanted to say that because I know a lot of these conversations can, a lot of these conversations that people have in our world tend to go towards, like, the victim of, well,
blaming.
If you weren't wearing this, then it wouldn't have happened. If you had just said no, if
You didn't walk down that dark alley.
there's a laundry list of if you would have, and so with talking about consent, that doesn't put any responsibility at all on victims at all. Like,
That's right.
it does not matter what happened in that situation at all.
That's
yeah.
right.
So.
So we wanted to start out with, like, a definition of consent. So that, to us, just because, we've done this before where we've taken, like, different topics and stuff, and we want to, say a definition so that we're all on the same page, basically, of, like, where we're coming from and, like, a starting place.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of talk about, like, two. So there's one, like, when you Google consent, the first definition that comes up is permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused, where, well, like we were talking before this, where, well, consent just means yes. that's not exactly true because there's a lot more layers to it. And so that's where there's this, I can never think of the word. What is the name for something like this?
Acronym.
There's an acronym called FRIES that I think describes consent a lot more, describes like the complexities. So consent is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific.
Yeah.
So that means like a yes doesn't necessarily just mean yes.
That's right. And we're going to get more into sort of the details of that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, part of that too is a lot of people also think that consent only has to do with sex.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with literally anything.
Yeah.
Like even a touch,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, that should be consent. Like there should be. And, you know, I understand because I've seen some conversations and such, and people go, well, like what, I'm supposed to get consent every time I want to touch someone, every time I want to, you know, and I'm like, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the problem with that?
Yeah.
You know, like what? The only people I've seen that have problems, that have an issue with obtaining consent, asking permission, whatever, are the people that would be like crossing the boundaries
Yeah.
and crossing the lines.
Yeah.
I know. Well, that's the thing is most people when we're talking about like, well, I just have to ask every single time, it's either because they're thinking of like, so what? Like I have to ask, you know, my partner, my sister, my brother, my mom every time I want to tap them on the shoulder, and they're like, that's ridiculous. Or it's just someone who's like, well, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Because they know that people would say no.
Right.
So, because if you don't offer up an option to say no, a lot of people won't say no. So they're like, well, I shouldn't have to ask.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. And that's where it's, you know, it's just made unimportant. And again, like, to me, it's very much surrounding, well, generally children and women.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you know, it's made sort of unimportant. Like, you know, like, why should I have to constantly ask? Why should I have to, you know, that, you know, the other thing that I've heard people say is that, you know, I guess if we're looking at, for example, like before having sex, like, oh, it's going to totally ruin the moment. And my thinking is like, okay, but who's it going to ruin the moment for? It's not going to ruin the moment for the woman, in that case, to be asked if you can touch her and if you can, if, you know, you want to have sex, if you want, you know, like that. It's not ruining the moment for her. Like, to me, that would make it a whole lot deeper moment that you actually are showing respect, so much respect for that person, that you would actually ask, because it is a very vulnerable thing.
Yeah.
It is vulnerable to ask, like, even for, you know, I mean, I've been thinking about this because, I mean, I am a hugger. I love to hug people. Not everyone. I get feeling, I love to hug people. And, you know, I have been thinking about that, going, okay, like, I don't always ask. I think that there's a way that I, you know, sort of not necessarily ask out loud, but I will sort of like hold off and go like, you know, I mean, I have asked, hey, can I give you a hug? Like, but anyways, it's made me think about like, okay, how do I come across, and, you know, how can I, because to me, the whole thing of consent is just, it's showing respect for another human being. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And I think all too often we're focused on the wrong thing. Like, if you're focused on you and your uncomfortableness, then that's just not good. Like, that's the wrong thinking.
I also think that that's a part, like what you were saying earlier, is that's a part of consent, is like reading someone, like someone's body language.
Yes.
And it's like, so yeah, like, like, I think, like, physically asking is so important, but it's like, that's half the battle. Like, if you're not paying attention, so I think that's like, that if you're at least thinking about that, of, I'm paying attention to this person and their body language so that I'm not doing something, you know, unwanted, like, that's a big piece of it that a lot of people are like, well, I just don't want to. But I think if we all paid more attention, there are a lot of times when you can tell if someone's uncomfortable or not. But a lot of people just don't, like, think about it. They just don't want to think about it. Whatever.
Yeah. So I want to sort of, like, go back in time of sort of where this starts, because, you know, like, we often we end up talking about it usually, I think, like, when, you know, teenagers, young adults, adults, like, that kind of thing is sort of where we start often talking about it.
Yeah, that's true.
And that is not, like, that's a whole lot of years.
Well, it's like when we start talking about sex, that's when we start talking about consent. And we don't even...
Well, that's where
we
like,
don't
we
even
don't
talk
really
about
talk
consent.
about consent when we talk
but
about sex.
the only
either.
time the only time that's even, like, a piece of a conversation is when we're talking about sex. And you only start talking, at least for the most part, we really only start talking to kids about sex when they're in, like, junior high.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a lot. That's pretty old.
That's
to
a lot of...
first start talking about, hey, maybe you should think about what other people, you know, want and don't want, or whatever.
Or what you want and don't
Yeah.
want, and that you can't have boundaries.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, and that's where it goes to. It goes to having boundaries. You know, and consent is just that. Basically, it's a way of asking, what are your boundaries? And then respecting them.
Yeah.
And if, like, what we really need to be teaching is we need to be teaching it in our homes from baby, from little, from, like, when you're playing with your child and you're horsing around and maybe you're tickling or you're, you know, roughhousing or playing, whatever it is. And if a child says stop, you need to stop immediately. Like if, like, I'm tickling my child, which, I mean, obviously I don't do that anymore with you guys because you're all older, but, like, you know, like, if I'm tickling my child and my child says stop, and I'm like, oh, but you're still laughing, so I'll keep going, that teaches that child that when they say stop or no, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What?
Well, I just think about, like, too, like, denying consent is really, really hard. Like, for things like that. Like, when someone says, like, can I hug you? Or, you know, can I whatever? It's so hard to say no. And I get that. But that's why I'm like, if we started teaching children how to say no to their literal, like, mom, when they're kids, I think then we could be, like, giving people the strength, not the strength, like the tools. The tools to use for consent outside of their home. But when you can't even say no to your parents, it's like, well, then how in the world are they gonna say no to a friend or to a teacher or anything else?
Yeah. Well, one of the things where I noticed it that we, you know, we taught you guys was when it came to, like, hugging adults and stuff like that. And we had some relatives in our life that would always, like, you know, oh, come hug me. Oh, I want to hug you. And, you know, and this. And you guys would refuse. Like, you did not want to hug. And I would be like, hey, like, can you give a high five? Do you want to just wave? Do you want to, like, you know, that's okay. And I got in trouble. I dealt with a lot of heat for that because I was told that I should make you give a hug because they were an adult, because they were a relative, a close relative, because they wanted that, then I was to make you. And that was one of the lines where I was like, I'm not crossing this, because I said, no, like if my child says no and they don't want to hug you, I'm not making them hug you. Because for me, that's then telling you to go against your gut instinct. Whether or it doesn't even matter if they are like the safe, if you know, if it is the safest person in the world, it doesn't matter. If you say no, like if you were to say no to me, then it's no. And where this comes, I mean, if we go down a different path, which we're not going down today, it's like, and if I am reacting and triggered by that, that's my own stuff that I have to deal with.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, that's my own stuff. That's not your problem, but adults make it kids' problems. And for me, it was really important that you guys learn to trust your gut. And if I just override that, then maybe at another point down the road, you might not trust yourself because you think, oh, well, but I had that, and it's not even going to be a conscious thing. That's the dangerous thing. It's not even going to be a conscious thing but in your mind will be replaying those events, because that's what it does. And it'll say, oh, in that moment, I said no, I didn't want to. Yeah. But a person I trusted said that this was okay, so go against my gut and do this. Yeah. And then it can lead down a...
And I think especially women are taught to like constantly put other people's feelings above our own. And that's what we're dealing with when we talk about consent. We're talking about someone's pride, usually. Like when someone is, you know, gets offended or gets upset when someone denies consent, it's ego or, you know, whatever. And so we're talking about when you are basically saying, no, you can't say no, then you're just saying like, well, you need to just put these people's feelings above your own. And like, I think women are just taught that, especially, like, not that, like, I think kids are put into that position because a lot of adults have this weird, like, power trip of, like, you have to listen to me because I'm an elder. But I think especially, like, women are socialized to do that, to just put aside their own feelings. Like, I've done that so many times where I'm like, oh, but they're so nice. But, like, he's so nice, so I should just give him a hug because, you know, I wouldn't want to hurt his feelings. But it's like, what about my feelings? Like, what about what I'm feeling?
Or I don't want to be seen as difficult.
Well, that's the thing. Us as women, like we've talked before, are already seen as difficult and whatever. That like you can't say no
because it's just a hug.
Yeah,
it's just a hug. It's not a big deal, right? Like, but if you're not allowed to say no to a hug, what else are you not allowed to say no to? Because I feel like we just, again, this is where consent is so, like, diminished, where we just, like, diminish things of, like, well, it's just a hug. It's just a kiss. It's just this. It's just whatever. You know, well, it's your relative, so who cares, you know? It's not like it's some stranger. But it's like, but when you teach consent, like, you're teaching the foundation of consent. Even if it's not a big deal, but you're teaching the foundation of consent, and then that's what that person, whatever, will know and think of as consent and know as consent. And then we're just, everyone else around us is like, oh, so that, yeah, my feelings are more important. You know, my ego is more important.
Well, and that's the thing. Yeah, we learn that what we want and what we need doesn't matter. Because it's always about someone else.
Yeah.
You know, it's always about, we don't want to be difficult. We don't want backlash or the repercussions of having to deal with that. You know, that's where, like, as a parent, that was, like, it was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable for me to stand there and these people want to hug you and you don't want to hug them, and then dealing with that. It was uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
But that's where I was like, but I'm the parent. I need to deal with my own stuff to be able to actually help you.
Yeah, well, I think that's like a big thing about consent is we really need to take the pressure off of the person that's supposed to be giving consent. Like, first of all, we need to teach what is consent. There should be, when you think of consent, there should be no doubts. There should be no hesitation. We should just know what consent is. But I think also to really, like, empower people to support others. Because, I mean, everyone has the power to give consent, right? So we're not even talking about, like, just a singular, like, person. But that's why I'm like, you know, as a parent, you know, help your kids. Or as a friend, like, oh, I've had tons of times where, like, I'll be in a comfortable, I feel like most girls have this situation where, you know, a guy or something will be talking to you, whatever, doing something, and it's just kind of something that you and, like, your girls know of, like, we just know, you just feel the vibe from your friend, and you go in and save him. And, like, I think if we understood consent more, we could be more aware, because, like, the weight it takes off your shoulders when you know that, like, I don't have to say no. I don't have to be the one that is being a jerk, being difficult. Like, my friend is gonna be the one to say no. My mom is gonna be the one to say no. Like, like, I would use that when I was a kid, actually, now I'm thinking. When, like, I didn't know how to say no, I'd be like, my mom said no. Because I didn't know how to. I was like, but then, because then I'm the, like, bad friend for saying no. And I think if we're more aware, like, you can even do that, like, with, I feel like women are very on that, though. Like, of paying attention to people's signs and knowing when someone is not, like, reciprocating things. Like, I feel like I can always tell when, like, a guy, you know, is talking to a woman or something and she's like, like, I feel like I can always tell. And I feel like a lot of women are aware of those things.
Well, and I don't think it's not that the guy can't tell, actually. I think it becomes an ego thing.
Totally.
A lot of times. Because it's, to me, saying that, well, like, a guy can't tell, I think that's just giving it a really easy out.
For
going,
sure.
oh, he can't tell. Yes, you know what? We're human beings. We get feelings. We all do.
Totally.
You know. Like, I mean, because, like, I've been there. I've been on both sides where I was so uncomfortable and I'd be, like, backing up.
Really? How do you not tell?
Like, there's no way that you cannot tell something like
Short
that.
answers.
Like,
you're
looking
around.
You're looking around. Like, you can't, like, and I think what it does is, in all of these cases, it becomes about the ego. It becomes about, because I don't want to, because that person is so focused on them. I know that's exactly what it was when we were dealing with you guys and the hugging and the relatives and whatever. It was all about them. It was like, well, but don't you love me? Oh, but you really don't love me then and stuff. And I'm like, it's not about you. Like, this is a child here. And that's the problem. If we start training our kids when they're young to do that, it gets really dangerous. But I read an article a while ago. It was a really big, long one. But there was a piece of it that really stuck out to me. And honestly, I think, like, if I were to raise you guys all over again and start all over again, I would teach this. And I'm actually, like, I mean, I've talked to you guys about it already, and I'm going to keep talking about it and keep talking about it and keep putting it out there, because I think it needs to be in the new curriculum. I'm going to talk about that too, but I think it needs to be in there. But this person, they were at this party, and they were talking about consent, and they actually then practice this, like, you know, can I touch your arm, whatever, and they practice no, and the response, they actually had a response for the person that was told no to. Their response was to be, thank you for taking care of yourself. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that is so beautiful. Like, that is amazing, because there's no ego there.
Yeah.
And it's making it okay to say no. You don't have to be, and I mean, that person went on and she talked about how it was still so uncomfortable for her to even say no. But, you know, like that, I just thought that was so amazing and if we could teach our kids that like to practice it at home, practice saying like, hey, can I give you a hug right now? And just say like, and practice scenario, no, thank you, not right now. Yeah. Or no, I don't want one, or not. Like, there's ways of saying it. And then, thank you for taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Like, I just think that's amazing to teach that.
Doesn't that, because then I feel like that takes a weight off of, like, the person, you know, denying consent or whatever.
Right. Because it is kind of awkward after. If you just say no, and then you just kind of
silent. You're like, okay. But yeah, then you feel like, all right, like, good.
Yeah.
I stood up for myself, and, like, it's being respected and appreciated.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, wow, I'm such a jerk. Like,
well, I know, and you feel bad, but
you
again,
shouldn't feel bad,
no.
but I at least do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, and I know one of the things that we've talked about before, and, you know, like, I mean, we can only talk for as women, obviously, is, can we even say no?
That's the thing.
You know, like, I remember when I was pregnant with all of you guys. I mean, that's a huge one for women, honestly. People that come up and touch your belly. Like, there's, like...
so weird.
No, like, I mean, I think there was a couple people, and you know what? I think in every case, it was a woman who asked if they could.
Yeah, probably.
But people would just come up, and I'm like, it was such a bizarre thing, especially in my first pregnancy, because I was literally like, you wouldn't do that any other time, but, like, just because, like...
And isn't that weird? Because, like, there's
goodness.
even more, like, at stake, because there's a child in you, like, like, I feel like it would honestly be less weird if they just came up and touched you, like, because, like, then it's just you, but, like, that's so weird that you think you can go touch a baby. Like, there's a baby in there! You can't just touch some strangers, like, that's so weird. It's just so weird to me. Like,
yeah. What?
Like, my hair, people would, like, come up and just pet me. Like, literally pet me. Like, a girl came up and was just, like, and talking to me, and I was, like, petting me, and I was like, what are you doing? Like, standing behind me, just petting me, talking to me. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I don't know what to do, but I'm like, I can't say no, even though it's, like, but, like, that's so weird. I'm like, why would you ever do that to someone? I've heard, like, Black people specifically, like, that say that people just touch their hair, and I'm like, why would anyone do that? Like, I would never just go up to you and pet your hair.
I'm also like it's
what?
It's just not, like, first of all, I just think it's kind of weird to be like, can I touch your hair? But, like,
Yeah.
even that, it's just not that hard to at least ask. Like, it's not that hard to just be like, oh my gosh, like, you have really nice hair, can I touch it? That's so weird.
It's so weird.
That's so weird. But at least
I can't even
ask. Like, that is so, I just feel like people, like, again, this is just another thing that really showcases, like, how little we think about consent and how little we care about consent, where, like, we will just randomly, like, I don't think everyone does it, like, I don't think I don't think I really do that, but, like, people will just be like, it's so nice to meet you. And I'm like, I don't even remember your name!
Yeah.
Why are you touching me? Like, I mean... Yeah.
I remember when both of you went to high school, and you'd come home, like, especially the first couple days. Now, I'm sure some of it was just due to the fact that you were both homeschooled before that, so not used to being in, like, you know, huge environments like that. Although, like, high school is very different as well than, like, you're a bit different than younger, but, you know, I remember both of you, like, at different times we'd, like, joke about, like, wearing one of those big, like, plastic bubbles or whatever. Because it was, like, just going down, just even walking down a hallway. Now, I mean, that's a little different because you end up running into people. But, like, both of you, specifically, like, with your health challenges and different things, like, you know, like for you, Erica, like someone just touching you, like that can really hurt actually. Right? Like that can be pain, which if you don't understand, which most people can't, they don't get it. Because it's like, well, what's the big deal? Like I get touched all the time. It's not a big deal. For you, I think it was your back.
Yeah.
Like if someone, even still, like if anyone ever touches your back, like, and, you know, and, but it's like I don't know where that sort of like that right came from, that people think they just have this right to touch people, to whatever, like.
Yeah. I think also, like, I think part of it too is because like I know, like, I'm a pretty touchy person, and like I know people who are really, you know, just touchy people, and like that's how they connect, and that's like totally fine. Like, I think the thing is that the problem isn't where it's like you just can't touch strangers, but if it was more like accepted to like ask these things, and it was more accepted to deny consent, then like it wouldn't be bad. Like you could just, like, touchy people could still be touchy people just with consent. Because yeah, like I think a lot, like there are definitely there are a lot of people who do it, like, who just don't care about your consent, but then there are some people who are reading, you know, body cues and stuff, but they just don't want to, like, make it weird. And that's the thing, is, like, I feel like we don't know how to, like, we don't know how to ask for consent. Like, I know I get uncomfortable even in the idea of, like, so I just, like, won't usually. Like, if I want, I mean, obviously right now COVID, so I'm not touching anyone, but, like, if I want to give someone a hug, I just, like, won't, because I don't want to do it without their consent, but I feel weird asking. Yeah. Like, I feel uncomfortable being like, hi, can I give you a hug? And, like, it shouldn't be that way, but I know.
Yeah, it should be the norm. That should be, like, normal.
Yeah, like, I feel like, and I don't know, like, I think if we taught kids from young to ask and give consent, then it wouldn't be weird, because everyone would be doing it. Like, if we taught kids at school, when they're in elementary, before they're in elementary, the second they reach freaking preschool, if we were teaching kids to just, like, ask consent, it would be a normal thing that we would all be doing. Like, obviously not all of us, but then it'd be pretty easy to weed out the weirdos, because you'd be like, what the heck?
Well,
why is she just touching me?
We need to be teaching it in our homes right from young. Like, we need to be teaching it, like, you know, from really little.
In homes and in schools.
And that was one of the things. Do you want to pull up so in the curriculum, there's new curriculum that they're proposing and such. And in Alberta, yes. Right. And there are a lot of problems with it. Anyways, I wanted to go through, because we were doing this on consent, and because they were so huge on, like, that we've put the stuff in about consent, and, like, and I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome. And so I went through and just looked, like, I mean, I didn't spend hours, and I didn't, like, you know, I haven't read every piece of the curriculum. But, so in grade 3, it says here, consent is established by clearly communicating refusal and permission.
Yeah. Like, what does that mean?
Refusal skills and consent are important for personal safety.
So, yeah, like, it's just, like, everything is towards the person giving consent. Well, you just need to learn to give consent better.
But also, that isn't consent. Clearly given.
Yeah.
That means nothing. You could clearly say yes, and it could be a no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could, like, that
well,
doesn't
right?
mean
Like,
anything.
we're not, like, why, like, if a freaking, you
clearly
know.
communicating refusal and permission. Well, so, okay, I'm going to go on, and then I want to get into, like, deeper into consent and some of the other things that we want to talk about. But, you know, grade 4, it says, consent is critical to respecting others' rights, feelings, and belongings. You know, and again, consent is from the person that has to say no. And to me, it's all being put on that person.
Yeah.
You know? Responsibility is, like, and that's grade 4. And then after that, there's not much. Like, grade 5 goes into responsibility as being accountable for actions and decisions and accepting the results or consequences. Like, there's nothing really about, you know, consent necessarily. Like, okay, grade 6. It is important to think clearly before giving consent to anything that may have long-term physical, emotional, or social consequences. Like, again, I'm like, what on earth? This is putting all of the blame on, it would, like, no wonder victims don't come forward.
Yeah.
Because they are blamed.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, what were you wearing? Where were you walking? What were you doing? What weren't you doing? What did you look like? What did you, like, all of this kind of stuff. And our curriculum is actually teaching that now.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what we were talking about at the beginning. About how, like, consent conversations always turn to, well, did you say no? And if you said no, or if you didn't say no, then it's your responsibility. And it's like, there's so many complexities in situations like that where you wouldn't be able to say no. You wouldn't feel safe to say no.
Yeah. So I know one that we had talked about, you had talked about specifically before, is like power dynamics.
Yeah, that's so, I think, so important to teach, especially from little, because I think you mentioned earlier the weird, like, power trip that a lot of parents get on, where, like, there's a power dynamic there. And so that's one aspect of consent. I don't remember which part of it, but that when there are power dynamics involved, so this would be like a parent-child, a
Coach.
elder child, a coach and a
and
student, a
teacher-student,
boss, employee, a, like, anything like that, you get, like, celebrity and a fan.
Yeah.
Like, there is a power dynamic there. There's a power difference.
Yeah.
And whenever you get that, there can't be consent. Right? That's why we have the laws about, like, what is it called? Like, the consent laws? Age of consent.
Yeah.
Because when there's a huge age gap, there's a huge power dynamic, and we can't, in those situations, you can't expect those
think
people
clearly.
to think clearly, to be able to say no. How are you going to say no as a fan to this person who has 10 million followers on Instagram? You're not going to say no.
Or, like, to a coach.
Yeah.
Who,
to your boss.
To your boss. Like, someone that holds power over you.
Yeah.
You're, like, you don't even have the opportunity to say no if you wanted to. So there can't be consent there.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, if you can't, if no isn't an option, then it's not consent.
Yeah.
Like, if your only option is yes, you're not actually saying yes. Like, you're being pushed into a corner, really.
Yeah. Forced, manipulated.
I mean, that's also where you get into, because I think this is, like I was saying, it's so important to talk to around kids, and so this is where, like, we've talked about around our house, where there's even a power dynamic with, like, siblings. Of, like,
Yeah, totally.
the oldest sibling to younger siblings, or, not even that, of, like, around friend groups. If there's, like, I mean, I remember this from being young. Your age matters so much when you were a child. Like, it matters. It is, like, the world. And if you are younger than someone,
like a week
like,
younger,
you are below them. And you will
Yeah.
do so many things to get them to like you that, again, there's a power dynamic. Even if there's, like, a month difference.
Yeah.
Like, you have to look at that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, we've talked about different scenarios where that's happened for you guys, where those power dynamics were used, like, against you, where, you know, like, and I will even say, too, that, like, I've had experiences in life where just being a man was a power dynamic.
Yeah, we've talked about this, and this is like a whole other, this is a huge conversation, but there almost is, because in our world, men, like, have the power. And so, yeah, to a point, there will always be a power dynamic when it's a man and a woman.
Yeah.
Like, which is, you know, I think a lot of times, like, yeah, when you're, like, especially when you're in, like, a relationship or, like, a friendship, like, a girl and a guy, I do, like, really am, like, yeah, consent is important for everyone to pay attention to, but especially, like, for a guy, because it's, like, you have more power. And that's in any situation, like, you know, where one person has more power. It's like, yeah, of course, consent is important for both parties, but the person who has the power, like, consent is really largely on you.
You're responsible.
Because, like, of course, again, like, yes, both parties need to, you know, be really clear on consent, and consent is so important, but when you have the power, a big responsibility is on you.
So just before we started this, actually, you were talking about a guy that was talking about consent and how we want to make it so simple.
Oh, yeah. Well, we want to put it in, like, I think with the Alberta curriculum is a perfect example of how we just want to be like, okay, so just say no. Just say no, and boom. Like, we just, you know, or just say yes. But, yeah, I don't remember who it was. Maybe I'll try to find the video, and we can, like, link it or something, because it was really interesting. But he was saying we try to make it simple of, like, you know, yes, no. But when we do that, first of all, people will, like, cling on to that. Like, a lot of people will cling on to that and go, okay, great. So if they're not, you know, running away screaming, then we're good. Or, well, they said yes a week ago, so it's fine. But when we try to make it simple, we're also ignoring the facts. The facts that there are power dynamics in our world. There are
When you were saying that, I was thinking of there just have been a lot of situations come out in the media over the last while. There always are. And one of them that I remember hearing about was there was this woman with this guy. There was a huge power dynamic, but that's not specifically what I'm talking about here. Where she came into the situation, said no. He proceeded to have a conversation with her for a few hours, and by the end, it was like a sort of. And so it was like, well, she said yes.
yes.
That's the problem with consent. Consent isn't coerced. Consent is freely given. That was not freely given if it took 3 hours to get to a yes.
Consent is ongoing.
Yeah.
Consent is not, okay, sure, we can do this. Like, but then, you know, if literally 5 minutes later they're like, actually, I changed my mind. Boom. Complete, full breaks. Like, and that was the thing that he was saying, was it's so dangerous because we're ignoring so many of the facts that, like, first of all, there are a lot of people, like, if you have been in a situation where consent was not an option for you, then you may not be able to say yes. You may not be able to say no. So we're ignoring that. We're ignoring power dynamics. We're ignoring, like, we're just ignoring all this stuff, and then we're also ignoring consent. That consent is, it's body language. It's you know, it's ongoing. It's all these things.
Yeah, it's not a one-time thing.
It's not a one-time, like, you can't say yes to sex one time and then a year later you're like, okay,
or
so we're good again?
Say yes to sex at the beginning of the night, and then that means yes for the entire night.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like,
I'm trying to bring up fries. Well,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, there's so much to it, and that's the whole thing that we need to teach, like all those nuances.
Because when we don't,
to it.
people latch on to.
Well, and that's the problem, and that's where, like, I think people want that, though, because it's
Yeah.
simple. It's like, oh, well, you said yes, you didn't say no.
Exactly.
You know, like, whatever. And, you know, like, one of the things that I wanted to mention, too, was the series, I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but it was on Netflix, Grand Army.
Oh,
And that was such a powerful, like, show. Like, wow. And they had a whole thing, and this is where, you know, for me, that it's really been playing around, especially talking about these things about sexual assault awareness and, you know, consent, because it went right there where it talked about all the consent. And one of the things that the guys said was, well, you didn't say no. And it's like, but that doesn't mean that that's all there is.
And it's like,
that's
you
not
don't
all
get
there
to,
is to consent.
you don't get to act like you're just an idiot. Like,
Yeah.
someone will be crying, and you'll be like, well, they didn't say no. Really? So
Yeah.
you either just didn't care at all, and we're not paying attention, we're just thinking about yourself, so then you're just a sucky person, or you did notice, and you went, well, they didn't say no, so I don't care. So either way, like it's just, I just feel like so many, it's just, well, they didn't say no, and it's like, really?
Well, and that's one of the biggest problems I have with the curriculum.
Yeah.
Is because they use words like clearly and this, and it's like, okay, so what about if someone is, like, not in their right mind?
Yeah.
What if someone's drunk or high? What about then? What, they're supposed to clearly say no?
Yeah.
And I've heard so many times where that person has been blamed.
Yeah.
And I'm
totally.
like, no,
Yeah.
totally wrong. This is one of those right or wrong, good or bad moments that it
Yeah.
is actually wrong. And there's no whitewashing it or washing it out, whatever, you know, I don't know the right term there, but, like, there's no gray area
Yeah.
at all. So, like, the FRIES acronym, which I think is fantastic. So, like, freely given, which we've already talked about, that reversible. We were just talking about that. It can be changed at any time.
Yeah.
Just because someone says yes now, 2 seconds later they could say no, and it doesn't matter. And you don't get to argue about it.
Yeah.
You don't get to say, oh, you already said yes, or
Yes.
no, too bad.
Right.
Like, it just is
I
that
know,
way.
once it's a no, it's a no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you convince someone to change their mind, that's not consent.
See, and that's something else that I think in our homes we need to teach as well. So that's been something that I have taught for you guys when you guys are just, like, horsing around. So it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with sex. It has to do with even, like, you know, I don't know, something's going on and someone's annoyed and you just say stop. And I've been like, no, if someone tells you stop, period. You don't get to keep doing it, and then you can stop, and then you can say, hey, can I ask you a question about that? Can I, whatever, you can do that, but you don't get to just keep going and say, well, but it's not a big deal. If someone had to say stop, it is a big deal to them.
Yeah.
Respect them.
Yeah.
Stop, and then if you'd like to have a conversation. Well, now to me it is different when it has to do with sex and all that too. Like, that's not, you know, like you kids playing around and someone's doing something annoying and you ask them to stop. But to me, that's where it starts in our homes, though.
Yeah.
Is
Totally.
when someone says stop, you stop the first time. And whatever. So informed. Both people need to know what they're consenting to.
Yeah.
I've heard people talk about that with, like, specifically sex, where it's like, you can't consent to something you don't know is going to happen. You know, like, so you can't say yes to sex and then, like, the partner decides to do something else. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, there's a lot of different ways to have sex.
yeah.
Like, there's
Yeah.
a lot of different things there that just because you say yes in that one moment, totally. Yeah. So, I like this one too, enthusiastic. Like, that's where it's like, both are very much like, yes, this is, and then specific, you know, even if you've done it before, like.
Well, yeah, that again is, like, if you're asking someone for a hug, you're asking someone for a hug. You're not asking for someone for
a hug and then feel them up.
Yeah, or a hug and a kiss, or, like, you are asking for a hug.
Yes.
That's it.
Right.
If you want something else, then you ask for that.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, there's so much, like, honestly, like, there's so much to this, really. I think one thing that really interested me, too, is you found, actually, Erica, a curriculum that is, like, it was really interesting. Do you want to...
Yeah, I haven't read tons about it yet. This is actually something that I found through the book Pure that we talked about, like, many episodes ago. Because she, the author of that book, she talks in the book about the issues with consent and how, like, sex ed is just, it's awful. Like, you don't really learn much about anything.
No. We're actually going to do an episode on that at some point, all about sex ed.
We'll do some sex ed.
Yeah, what about sex ed? Yeah.
But, yeah, she found this curriculum, it's called OWL, Our Whole Lives, and basically it follows you from, I don't know, like, toddler to, like, senior. And so there's, like, different courses for each age group, talking about, like, sexuality and consent and all of that, to be informed at each age. And it's, I don't know, it's really interesting. I want to look more into it, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I thought, wow, like, I haven't looked at it a whole lot either, but the bit I've seen looks, like, great, you know, and just, I mean, it just, really it comes down to we just need to have more conversations. We need to be having conversations in our home from when our kids are little. We need to be having conversations all, like, it's ongoing, too. It's ongoing. Our kids need to feel safe that they can come to us and go, hey, like, when you hugged me, like, something just felt off. And, or when that person hugged me, like, I just didn't like that. And, you know, and talk. And, like, again, you know what? It's uncomfortable. Like, it's uncomfortable to say, no, like, you know, to have someone say to you, no, I don't want to hug right now. No, I don't want to be touched right now. You know, it's uncomfortable to maybe even ask, like, hey, can I give you a hug or whatever. But to me, if we respect ourselves and we respect other people, then we shouldn't worry about that, because it's not about us. It's about all of us taking care of each other. Like, and that to me really what consent is about. It's really taking care of ourselves, but not just that, it's actually taking care of everyone around us and making sure other people are okay.
Yeah, totally.
And stuff too.
Well, that's what I was just thinking, like, this conversation is so important, partially just so that everyone can be informed, so that when, specifically this month, like with Sexual Assault Awareness Month, when victims come forward and there's a, well, I was drunk, or there's a power dynamic, or all these things that people would normally be like, well, that's your fault, then we can be informed and understand that, no, that wasn't consent. You know?
That's right. That's right.
And we can have more empathy and understanding for these people.
Well, you know, and again, like, I just think, like, almost every episode that we do, like, again, we come back to, we always end up coming down to, accept first, then you can seek to understand. And here we are again. Accept first. Whatever someone says, if they, like, consent, like, if it's a, you know, like in the one article that I talked about before, they, you know, they had said, like, in this specific scenario, it's not, this wasn't talking about general consent, this was like a very specific time, but, you know, they had said, like, if you're a yes, say yes, if you're a no, say no, if you're a maybe, say no, like, you know, and so if you don't know, it's a no. Like, if you're not sure, it's a no. If there's any kind of doubt at all in your mind, like, if there, like, it's a no. And I'm not talking about the person that's having to say no. I'm talking about the other person. Like, and that's where, like, it takes awareness, and it takes us going and dealing with our own egos.
Yeah.
Our own feelings around all these things and such, because really, like, and that's really why we wanted to do this. We wanted to get conversation going, and I mean, that's what our whole podcast is about, is to just, like, that wait, take a second. And wait can also stand for, what am I thinking? So if you wait when someone is saying no to you, do the wait and think, what am I thinking right now? Am I actually thinking what's best for this person who's in front of me right now? Or am I thinking what's best for me? You know? And do that and just question. And that's really what we wanted. We wanted to just open up conversation about consent. And we wanted to talk about some of those key elements, what actually makes up consent. That it's not just a simple yes or no. And we need to be teaching those things. We need to be talking about those things. So, like, even, like, in friend groups, in families, and any kind of relationships, like, have those conversations. Have the conversations around, like, what it means, where you're at. Constantly be asking, because really it's showing respect for the other people around you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anything else? No, we're good. We got some other. Yeah, it's a big conversation. Next week's gonna be on rape culture, I think, is where we're taking it to. So that's gonna be a little heavier one in some ways, to just end off the month. And we're going to be talking about, like, some stats and some just all around information. So again, like, I mean, we're always up for conversation. If you have some ideas, or if anyone ever has any ideas or anything about other episodes, but even comments on what we're talking about, like, definitely, you know, comment or send a message. And find us on all our social media.
We're on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube.
All podcast platforms.
And it's the official WWP.
Yeah, and we'd appreciate everyone following and subscribing. I mean, I always hate saying those things, but, like, they always say that you're supposed to say that, so I guess, you know, whatever. Anyways, and sharing it, like, that would be fantastic. Have conversation, and, because, you know, we're just gonna, I mean, it's just really conversations that we always have, and then we just want to put them out there, and maybe it'll bring conversation to someone else. So, okay.
Okay, see you next week on Wait, what?